This is the Western African Islamic Revolution and the rights and responsibilities that came with it. The Western African Islamic Revolution began in the 8th century. It first began due to trade routes. While trade routes are important to note, the main influence of the revolution was religion. Religion grew significantly by the 11th century, and by the 18th and 19th century, movements began. This was a response to political issues, social inequality, and religious corruption. These movements fought for a purer form of Islam. Their goal was to promote social and religious equality, as well as a legal reform. This revolution's overall goal was to improve the Islamic society's rights and responsibilities. First, we will discuss the religious rights and freedom of Islam. Muslims' religious rights were much freer than non-Muslims. The revolution made sure that Muslims could practice freely. This had a focus on Islamic education and obeying to Sharia. Muslims were strictly judged by their piety regardless of their social and economic status. The religious rights and freedom for non-Muslims were not quite the same. Non-Muslims were given dhimmi, a protective status. This is an Islamic rule allowing them to practice their religion, but not without punishment. While at the time being allowed to practice their religion was a blessing, they must pay a tax. This is called jizya, or religious tolerance. Non-Muslims were allowed to worship freely with this rule, but were also encouraged to convert to being Muslim. In some cases, people are converted by choice, but in others, social political pressure could make conversion seem like the only option. With this religious freedom, the idea was that it created justice and showed some equality in religious freedom. Muslims had more benefits, while non-Muslims had limited tolerance being under Islamic governance. Next, we will discuss important movements that had immense impact on the revolution. First, the Sokoto Caliphate, 1804 through 1903, led by Usman Dan Fodio. This movement emphasized the need of purifying the Islamic religion, also further establishing the Islamic State governed by the Sharia law. To go along with the Sokoto Caliphate movement, the Tuklar Empire 1855 through 1893 also affected social justice greatly during this time. Led by Al-Ahi Umar Tal, an Islamic scholar and military leader, this movement's purpose was to unite the Fulani, Mandinka, and other groups in the Islamic State. The establishment of the Sharia law came about due to the creating of Islamic states. Different leaders wanted to implement justice by following the Sharia law. This system was seen as a divine one that made good legal system with justice, equality, property protection, and human rights. This law was a way that ultimately changed their society for the better. Social equality was also preached among Islam, how regardless of social status, people should be treated equally. To achieve this equality and equitable amounts of wealth and resources, they are distributed with specific intention to the poor and unfortunate. In their minds, the Islamic society would be governed and led by the ideas of fairness, and the wealthy were expected to support the needy by giving, also known as zakat.
During the Western African Islamic Revolution, education was considered a basic right and an important responsibility for all Muslims. Leaders in Africa believed that everyone should learn, specifically about the Quran and the teachings of Islam. What's powerful is that women were included too. Leaders like Nana Asma'u worked to make sure women could get an education so they could understand their faith and contribute to their communities. Islamic schools, called madrasas, were a big part of this movement. They didn't just teach religion, they also taught Arabic and other important subjects, helping people become literate and informed. This focus on education created a stronger, smarter, and more united society, a lasting impact of the revolution. Protecting the Islamic faith was seen as an important responsibility for everyone during the West African Islamic Revolution. Leaders believed that Islam should guide all parts of life, and they worked to make sure people practice it the right way. One big responsibility was following the Sharia law. This meant living according to Islamic rules and making sure leaders were fair and followed these rules too. Another responsibility was stopping practices that mixed Islam with local traditions, which were seen as going against the religion. Scholars and teachers helped by educating people about their faith and what it meant to be a good Muslim. Communities also had to defend Islam by standing up to threats from colonial powers or fighting against unfair or corrupt rulers. Protecting faith wasn't just about rules, it was about building a society where Islamic values like honesty, fairness, and helping others could grow. Upholding justice was one of the most important responsibilities for both leaders and citizens. Leaders were expected to follow Sharia law and make fair decisions that benefited everyone, not just the wealthy or powerful. A big focus during this revolution was on ending corruption. Many leaders in the region before the revolution abused their power, so reformers wanted to replace them with rulers who were honest and guided by Islamic principles. They believed that justice meant treating everyone equally, no matter what the tribe or social status. Islamic courts were also set up to make sure disputes were settled fairly. Judges followed the teachings of Islam to ensure everyone got the justice they deserved. Justice wasn't just about leaders, it was also about individuals. People were expected to act with fairness and kindness in their daily lives, helping to create a society where everyone was treated with dignity and respect. Upholding justice was seen as an essential to living out the Islamic values and building a better community.
Resistance colonialism. Anti-colonial resistance in Western Africa was a significant movement during the early 20th century. Specifically between 1914 and 1918, these rebellions were driven by the rejection of European colonial powers, which imposed economic exploitation, political control, and cultural dominance over African societies. Islam, which had come to Western Africa through trade, played a central role in uniting various communities against colonial rule. The movements in Western Africa were aiming to dismantle colonial systems, but also were fighting for a more inclusive and diverse society in local traditions and values. Establishments of Islamic states. Islamic states in Western Africa began to form as Islam spread across the regions through trade, travel, and cultural exchange. As time went on, rulers and elites converted to Islam and started to adopt the religion to strengthen trade ties and political alliances. This is what led to Islamic states forming in West African societies. The Islamic states also kept their Islamic principles and used it into their governance, laws, and education systems. They also would blend it with local traditions in Western Africa. The Islamic states forming also had helped with the development of major centers of learning, which had later become hubs for Islamic scholarships and cultures. Internal conflicts. In the 19th and 20th centuries, Western Africa faced significant internal conflicts that shaped the region's history. Many of these conflicts arose from struggles between traditional authorities, Islamic reform movements, and colonial powers. Islamic reformers, such as those in the Sokoto Caliphate, sought to establish pure Islamic states, often clashing with existing local rulers who combined traditional practices with Islam. At the same time, ethnic and tribal rivalries intensified, and the European colonizers drew borders that forced diverse groups into single political entities. The introduction of colonial rule disrupted traditional systems of governance and created competition over resources and political power.
In conclusion, the Islamic Revolution, which began in the 8th century, was influenced by a combination of trade routes and, more significantly, religious factors. As Islam spread and grew throughout the centuries, particularly by the 11th century, religion played a central role in shaping the course of the revolution. By the 18th and 19th centuries, the movements emerged as responses to political oppression, social inequality, and corruption within religious institutions. These movements aimed to restore a pure form of Islam, advocating for a greater social and religious equality, as well as legal reforms. Key examples of this include the Almoravid Empire in the 11th to 12th centuries and the Jihad movement in the 18th to 19th centuries, both of which left a profound impact in the direction of the Islamic Revolution. Ultimately, these efforts sought to create a more equitable and reformed Islamic society.